Okay, so we'll continue with the sugya in Bava Metzia, Mem Tes Omid Beis, the discussion about ona'ah, about fraudulent sales, and how we evaluate them. And we'll touch on something here, actually maybe come to a conclusion on whether or not it's Rav or Shmuel who we look to, but then we'll open up a new frontier, which is very intricate and complicated. It will take a little time to really sort of get through. So where we are is that we have a machlokes between Rav and Shmuel as to whether, when we talk about the shtus, when we talk about 1/6 being the operative amount that divides between a deal that's acceptable and one that's considered fraudulent, the question becomes, and we've discussed now for the last few weeks, whether the 1/6 goes to the value of the item or the actual dollar amount, the cash or the dollar amount exchanged. And there is a difference, because 1/6 of the value, for instance, if you have an item that is worth 6 zuz and you sell it for 5, that's 1/6 of the value, and both Rav and Shmuel agree that that is considered onah, right? Rav and Shmuel say that 1/6 of value is considered onah. The difference between them comes in an example where you sell something worth 5 for 6. In other words, you flip it and you're selling it for 6, but it's worth 5. Then the onah is 1 out of 5, 20%, not 1/6. According to Rav, that's no longer onah. That's excessive, and the deal can be voided by either party. And the principle of onah is, and again, we'll have to backtrack and just explain that there is a halacha in onah, but our Mishnah deviates from that halacha. The halacha in onah is that when something is exactly 1/6 difference between the sale and the value, then the best you can do, depending on time limits and other things, but the best you can do is to get the money back that is the difference between what it should be and what it is. So, for instance, if in the Mishnah's example of 4 zuz out of 24, which is 1/6, if the sale was for 24 and it turned out to be 28, so that now you have additional 4 zuz, you get the 4 zuz back. You can't void the deal, but you can get the 4 zuz back. That's the halacha. The Mishnah doesn't subscribe to this halacha, and that's important for us to understand now and going forward, that according to this Mishnah, onah, the 1/6, allows you to make a decision to either get your money, the differential back, or cancel the whole deal. So, for instance, if it's more than 1/6, everybody agrees that you cancel the deal. No question. If it's less than 1/6, well, you can't cancel the deal, and that will be the subject of our discussion this morning. But if it's exactly 1/6, what do you do? So according to the Mishnah, you have a choice. You can cancel the deal or say, no, I want this deal to go through. So the aggrieved party says, just give me the difference back, and I want the deal to go through. That's the halacha. So now, according to Rav, who says it's based on value, okay, you get, if it's based on value and there is a discrepancy, then according to the Mishnah, there's a choice: either get the money back or cancel the deal. According to Shmuel, who says, well, I agree with Rav, but I also say that there is onah in the case of 1/5, where you overcharged by 20%, but the overcharge was 1/6 of the amount of money that was spent, in which case you now have, according to Rav, a voidable deal, totally voidable because it's over the amount, it's not an exact. And according to Shmuel, the choice is for the aggrieved party to say, I still want the deal and just give me my differential, or voidable. So that's the chilek between Rav and Shmuel in this, according to the Mishnah, in the case of a overcharge from 5 to 6, because 1/5 is more than a sixth. It's 20%. Nevertheless, according to Shmuel, it is void. According to Rav, it is totally voidable. According to Shmuel, it's not voidable by either party. The aggrieved party makes the decision whether to keep the deal and get the money or walk away from the deal. Oh, go ahead, Jay.
Excuse me, Rabbi. I may have missed this from last week or the week before, but you're talking a little bit about apples and oranges. Money is exact, plus or minus 0. Value can never be exact. It's an estimate from an expert or whatever way you want to say it. So why do they say both of these are equal? I mean, one's in
the money is the definition of the value.
Right. So I understand what you're asking, Jay, and what Menashe is saying is actually on point, because according to there is an established value, let's say an appraised value or a value that's out there that everybody knows. Oh, this chayfetz is worth 6 zuz. It's worth 6 zuz. Everybody knows it. That's common in the marketplace. Now, you're going to sell it for 5 zuz, so thereby the seller will lose 1/6 of the value. The value is there, Jay. I mean, you can always say, oh, someone else is going to appraise it differently, but we're talking about something fairly objective that the world knows or the community knows, that's the value of this particular chayfetz. So if I'm going to undersell that chayfetz by selling it for 5 rather than 6, then it's 1/6 of the value. 1/6 of the value, and therefore Rob says, and even Shmuel agrees, that is oh no. That is oh no.
I understand that. I'm questioning it a little differently, perhaps.
Okay.
Didn't explain it. You have 2 approaches to come up with an answer. One is precise because you had a dollar amount per se. The other is they may put a dollar number on it, but it's not exact. The estimated value of something in the marketplace can never be perfect. The other way of exact counting money is exact. So why do they equate the two and deal as if they're the same, is what I'm getting at.
Okay.
Why does possible inaccuracy equal exactness?
Go ahead, Menashe.
So here's the way I look at it, and I may be totally wrong. I'm often wrong. Okay, so you have 2 ways to look at it. So you have something, if you have something that's, quote, valued at 6 zuz and it's sold, maybe it's sold at 5 zuz or it's sold at 7 zuz, okay, and we have the up, the down, and all those different things where it comes out more than 6, less than 6, whatever, where there's an exact amount, so to speak, on the money that actually changes hands, but we're in a sense estimating, but we're treating it as an exact amount on what this nominal value is. And if you go the other direction to say he paid 7 zuz or he paid 6, whatever, but now he's going to sell it for a different amount. There's always, I'm not being very clear here. We're always taking at some point saying there's a nominal value and turning it into an exact amount, whether it's at the beginning end of it or the end of it. We have to do that. And so we're effectively always doing the same thing. It's a question of where do we decide, which direction, and how do we determine whether this is more or less than a 6. But we're basically always assuming that at any given point, whether it's the amount spent or the amount that should have been spent, we're always assigning exact amounts. Otherwise, none of this works.
I'm asking you, well, probably not getting through.
Okay, so Jay, let me
bushels of apples, bushels of fruit, whatever it is, or 20 cars lined up. Somebody wants to buy 20 cars, So you can count and say, I have an exact answer when it's okay and when it's not okay, high or low. But when it comes to estimating things, it's never that accurate. So why did the Chachamim allow two approaches and not say that they're not exactly right, but for the purpose of commerce, we got to have something, so we have to use estimates, which means that it wasn't exact. It can never be exact if you're talking about estimated assessments of things. Whereas counting bushels of apples, it's exact.
The problem is
Approaches are different, and why do they come and put them as equals in terms of
the
analysis?
problem is historically there were economies in which they posted a fixed price every day, and in some cases in these economies it was a crime to violate it. Other cases it was a guideline. So we don't know for sure, but the Chachamim were dealing with the real world as usual, and sometimes they had to deal with one where it was a very serious violation if you didn't follow the fixed price that was set. Usually it was only set for very basic commodities like bread, but other places they set it for, as we know, there are socialist economies and capitalist economies have varied throughout history. But in certain cases, they were actually dealing with a fixed price, and the price was fixed exactly every single day or every single week for certain commodities.
Thank you.
So, Jay, I understand where your dilemma is, but let me just take a step back. What the Gemara is actually telling us is that estimates, appraisals, all of these things are valid in coming to grips with the halacha. So whereas you're flipping it and saying, how are they comparable when we have actual money for which we have, this is the actual hard money, and now we're sort of advancing and comparing it to appraisals and estimates. So what I'm trying to say is you're flipping it because the principle of the Gemara has nothing to do with money. It has to do with value, because you see that both Rav and Shmuel agree that 1/6 of value is ono. That's the sort of the gold standard. 1/6 of the value. How you get to the value? Okay, I mean, there is an accepted practice in the marketplace through buy and sell, through a lot of activity. We come out with a price, and the price is like everything else. You say it's approximate, but we say this is what the price is. Forget about the hard money. We're talking now about appraising something and getting a value. That's how the Gemara is sort of counting, looking at all this picture. The whole idea of money becoming an additional way of evaluating, let's say, ono, that's the add-on. That's not the underlying principle, and there's a machlokas to that because Rav doesn't hold of it. So we've got to go with the broadest understanding of what ono is, and that is the accepted practice in the marketplace that ono is based on values.
Okay.
It's based on values. It's Shmuel who's coming in and adding, wait a minute, it's not just values, it's actual hard currency. So Jay, don't flip that and say, well, then if that's the case, then that should be the standard. And why are we worrying about valuations, which are inaccurate or inexact, I should say?
Yeah.
We have the hard money. The teretz is that the hard money confuses the subject. It's the valuations that is the accepted practice, and that we see that when it's a valuation of 1/6, okay, you're going to say, well, maybe it's a 6 1/4 or a little bit less than a 6. We're not makbid. We're talking about a 6, and we're not worried if it's a fraction up and fraction down. The whole idea of money was an add-on that Shmuel came up with and said, you know what? I'm going to infuse another dimension into this. And Rav and many of the other Amoraim said no. And that's why the Gemara is going back and forth here and trying to say, who's the halacha like? Are we going to prove it like Shmuel? Are we going to prove it like Rav? Maybe Shmuel's got a point. Maybe he doesn't have a point. And we're about to come to some conclusion. Once we finish our discussion, we're going to see what the Gemara tells us. But I think from your standpoint, Jay, you want the money because it's fixed and hard to be, that's the standard. It's based on the money. Yet the Amoraim as a whole rejected that, and when they put it all together, they said the governing principle is valuation, not money. It's valuation.
Okay.
And as you're right, it could be slightly inexact, but that didn't disturb them. It didn't bother them that if you said a sixth and you were a fraction off, that changed the whole dynamic. Didn't bother them at all. So therefore, we go with valuations.
One point I have, and again, I could be wrong, but in my mind, part of the whole reason why we allow any variation, a sixth, let's say, up, down, whatever, depending exactly which way you calculate, but basically is because there might be slight inflation. It might be this produce is a little bit defective. It might be that the market is very tight right now. It might be you want to sell a little cheaper because it's Friday afternoon and you got to get rid of everything before Shabbos. It could be all kinds of different reasons. And so to say, well, there are estimates involved, there are changes involved, so we're going to allow a sixth, where some other society, as David said, might say, this is the price. It's $1 for a dozen eggs. We don't care whether these are good or bad or indifferent. That's the price. Here we'll say, no, it could be a little more. You could sell it a little more. You could sell a little less, but within these bounds of nominally a sixth, however we decided.
Right. So I think we're kind of all sort of now in agreement that's how the Amoraim looked at it from the standpoint of what's considered to be a fraudulent transaction, and we're going to see now from the proof that we're about to give. It'll surprise you, but you'll see exactly how the Gemara now comes out in terms of Rav and Shmuel and how we look at it. But basically, the principle that both Rav and Shmuel agree to is that valuation is what is the key point. So let's just take a look here. 3 lines from the bottom on Mem Tes Amud Beis. Almost finished with the daf. And now the Gemara is, so we had some back and forth last week. We wanted to bring a raya to Shmuel. It didn't work out. We said maybe Rav, didn't work out. So now the Gemara is going to come to some conclusion. Who's right here? Rav and Shmuel. I mean, after all, we want to try to understand. Now, when we say who's right, Shmuel agrees with Rav on valuation. It's that Shmuel comes in with an extra dimension, which Rav doesn't agree with. That is to say, 1/6 of money, which by definition could be a fifth, not a sixth, but nevertheless, from Shmuel's standpoint, that is considered a sixth. Now take a look. Tanya Kavasa de Shmuel, bottom 3, end of the 3rd line from the bottom. The Gemara now says we're going to bring a raya, a brisa, like Shmuel. What is the brisa? The brisa says as follows. Mi shehut lalav yado al alyona. Says the brisa, the person who was aggrieved, meaning whether it's the lokeach or the mocha, we know that it can be both ways. The person who is aggrieved, yado al alyona, his hand is on top. What does that mean? His hand is on top? It means he controls the deal. Ketzad, example. Mocha lo shaveh bavav. If the seller, right, the mocher, he had something that was worth 5 zuz and he sold it for 6, meaning who is the aggrieved party? Minis ana, who is aggrieved, who is defrauded? Lokeach, because the lokeach is paying 6 for something that's worth 5, okay? Then we say, yad lokeach al elyona, the buyer, the lokeach, is the aggrieved party. He controls the deal. What does that mean to control the deal? Rotza, remember what I said about the Mishnah, that this Mishnah flies against the halacha, the general halacha. Rotza omer tenli mosai. He can say, I'm canceling the deal, give me my money back. That's not the halacha. That's what this Mishnah is saying. So he has a choice. He can say, I don't want this deal anymore. You defrauded me. I don't want the deal. Or he can say, Tenli masha nosani, or just give me back the amount that you defrauded me. So the lokeach makes the decision as to whether or not he's defrauded or cancel the deal. That's according to our Mishnah. That's the first part of the Mishnah, of the Brisa. What's the second part? Mocher lo, if he sold him shava sheish b'chamesh, flip it. It was worth 6 and he sold it for 5, right? So who is the aggrieved party? Minisana mocher. The seller is now the aggrieved party because he was shortchanged and sold it for 5 when it was worth 6. Says this Brisa, Yad mocher ala elyona. It's the seller who controls the deal. What does that mean? The seller controls the deal. Omalo tainli mikochi. If he says, "Give me my, I want to give me my merchandise back. I want to go home," he can do that. O tainli masha onosani, or give me that extra zuz that I undersold, and then I'll be whole. So what do we see from this brisa? This brisa is equating both cases as yodo al elyona. In one case, the lokeach is al elyona. One case is the mocher is al elyona. But by definition, this paschal is like Shmuel, because Shmuel is the one who says that if you upsell from 5 to 6, which is a chomesh, it's 20%. It's not a 1/6. It's a 1/5. Rav doesn't hold it that. According to Rav, that's totally avoidable deal because it's more than a chomesh. It's more than a shtus. But according to Shmuel, it's still shtus. How can it be shtus if monetarily it's 20%? The teretz is that shtus of money, like Shmuel says, is also shtus, not just shtus of value. So to your point, Jay, we see that, so Shmuel is introducing this concept that a shtus of money, which by our definition is a 20% markup. He went from 5 to 6. Everybody in our economy would say that's a 20% increase. He's saying it's not 20%. He's saying it's 1/6, whatever percent that is, 16 or whatever percent fraction that is. So according to Shmuel, that's still a shtus. And the Brisa says Yado al Elyona, that he controls the deal. So we see from that Brisa that the halacha is like Shmuel. Not only is value considered, but money is also considered. So to your point, that's the chiddush. Not that the value, everybody agrees. Rav and Shmuel, that 1/6 of value is shtus. But Shmuel comes and says, what looks like 20% is really only 16%. It's really a shtus. And therefore, the deal is either voidable or not because Yodo al Elyona. So according to this brisa, the halacha is like Shmuel, that you have a choice. You can evaluate shtus on the basis of appraised value, or you can evaluate it on the basis of actual money, which in our world doesn't sound totally right because it's 20%. But that's the halacha according to this brisa. And we actually paskin like that because that's the last word. This is again, this is in the times of the Gemara, they held like Shmuel that that you can have shtus on both value and on money. So that's an interesting concept.
Rabbi, if
Yeah.
under that premise, in the example of the seller being able to decide whether he wants to call off the deal or add a sixth,
Right.
if he says, I want to add a 6th, does the buyer have the right to then negate the deal, or must he come up with the 6th?
No, only the aggrieved party controls what happens. So if the seller was aggrieved, the buyer has no seat at the table. The buyer basically has to be at the mercy of the seller, and either he gives him that extra zuz, or the seller walks away with his merchandise. The buyer is totally at the mercy of the seller.
So the buyer has nothing at that point. If he doesn't want to pay the upcharge, he's got no choice. He's
got no choice. That's right. That's
Thank
exactly right. That's the way in other words, you took it to Bez, and that's the way the paskin is that it was a mistake. It was an incorrect deal. And the brisa says that the aggrieved party, that's the key. The aggrieved party makes the decision. So therefore, he says, I want the difference, but I want the money back, but I want the deal to go forward. And the buyer says, nah, I changed my mind. Buyer, you don't have a standing here. Right? Okay. So that's where we are as a maskana. So let's take a quick look. We'll look at the bottom Rashi of Mem Tes Amud Beis, Tanya Kavasa de Shmuel, the bein shtus mekach, bein shtus mos. That shtus is both for mekach, for value, for the evaluation, and for mos and for money. So that's what this Bryce is coming to teach us. Misha hutl alav. What does it mean? Misha hutl alav. Misha ha'onav alav. Misha onsa. Who is the victimized party? So in other words, the victimized party makes the decision on whether this is a fair deal or not a fair deal. And in reality, there's nothing wrong with that, because if you don't want to give both parties necessarily the opt-out provision. So you say opt-out is for the person who was aggrieved. The person who wasn't aggrieved, to him, it's a regular deal. Right? It's the person who's aggrieved who has to decide, do I still want to deal with this fellow, or am I so upset and angry that I don't even want to do business with him? Sometimes, what do we say? You cut your nose to spite your face. It's a good deal, but you don't want it because you're insulted that he upcharged you, as an example. All right.
Rabbi, normally on a matter of mamonos, on a machlokus of Rabbi Shmuel, the halacha would go with Shmuel anyway, right?
Because he's the later. So we always take the position that it's the later of the, in other words, as late as you can go, they have the opportunity to evaluate the former and came out with a different, whereas Rav may not necessarily have. Again, I mean, Rav was a giant, so we're not going to say that he didn't necessarily understand it. But yes, that is the principle, that the latter psak, or the latter view, is usually considered the better view, because Shmuel was a Talmud of Rav. Now, when you have two equal Amayroim who are having a discourse, but they're contemporary, then Abai and Rava. I mean, that was a different relationship. So or Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, for instance. But even though Beis Shammai was older, he was the older of the two. But nevertheless, you see that the halacha is like Beis Hillel, because he was the latter, also for other reasons. He was more makel, it was more practical. But yes, in this particular case, you're right, David, that
Rabbi,
the halacha might naturally be according to Shmuel. Okay.
Rabbi, this is the first time, and of course I'm no expert, but the first time I encountered that the halacha flies in the face of the Mishnah. How big is that the fact that the Mishnah is explicit and the Gemara
it
overrides that, if you will, or augments that?
Yeah, that means very significant, because normally you don't see that. I mean, the halacha is the halacha. So you have a Mishnah that really departs from the halacha, and not only departs from it, but we're going to see. Okay, so we just gave an example, right? We're going to see going forward how much more complicated this Mishnah becomes, because it makes that distinction. Remember, what's the distinction? According to the Mishnah, if you have an exact shtus, you have a choice of disengaging or just getting the differential back. That's not the halacha. The halacha is you can't disengage. You can only get your differential back. So, it's two different worlds. It's two different worlds. Yet, for purposes of this Mishnah, we're now going to build an entire discussion, an entire Gemara, based on this Mishnah, which technically flies in the face of halacha. You don't see that. I mean, the halacha is the halacha. We know what the halacha is, but we're sort of riding along with the Mishnah, because because after all, I mean, the B'Yehuda Nasi and the Tanoim of the time felt strongly that this should be the way we look at it. So it's an interesting dynamic. It's not something. I mean, something is worth delving into further. I don't know that there's any other experience like it in Shas, where the halacha. I mean, where there's a Mishnah And we know that that's not the halacha, but yet we're going to build a whole empire, a whole discussion on what the Mishnah is telling us the way to go. And that's really, really extraordinary. I have to say that. It's really extraordinary. Okay. So let's look at this Rashi here on top. Shava sheish b'chamesh shtus mekach shava chamesh b'sheish shtus mos. In other words, it's like we said, shtus mekach shava chamesh b'sheish. So if you upsell it from 5 to 6, it's shtus mos. If you downsell it from 6 to 5 in this example, then it's shtus mekach because you're going on the valuation, not on the money. Okay. So now, so we've arrived at this point, and what we'll do now is okay. So now we're up to a boilahu. So the Gemara now is going to take a little different path here and ask an interesting question. Okay, what have we said? So let's break it down. 3 categories, right? Less than a shtus, more than a shtus. So to be clear, less than a shtus is mechila, forgiveness. Okay, the Gemara now is going to explain to us what mechila might mean, but for our purposes, there's no one has rights here. It's mechila. It's mechila. A shtus, we just went through, depending on how you look at it. According to Rav, it's strictly valuation, and according to Shmuel, it's monetary, and therefore you can either undo the deal, or just get the shtus. More than a shtus, right? Everybody agrees in more than a shtus that it's voidable from either side. It doesn't mean it has to be voided. If the parties come together, see, this is interesting. If the parties come together and say, we still want to make this deal, and they are of like-minded, then you correct the money, right? You correct it as if it was a shtus, and you move on. It's not an automatic that the deal has to be voided. It's just that either side can void it. I don't know who it was that asked the question, maybe Jay or Michael. You asked the question, well, can the other party void the deal in the case of a shtus? No. In the case of a shtus, if yado al elyona, only the person who's been aggrieved, he controls what happens. But if it's more than a sixth, then it's wide open. Either party can control the deal and say, we want to void it. Or they can come together and say, we don't want to void it. We want to make this deal. Let's just paper it over. Give me the money, and we move on. That's if it's more than a sixth. Yeah, Michael.
Rabbi, but that means, so if both parties agree, we don't want to change the price, but public policy, the Beis Din says this is the price, they must change the price, or can they agree to go with the price that is in violation?
Well, let's put it this way. The party that's been aggrieved isn't going to agree to go forward with the deal if he's losing money. Now, I'm not going to say that in the real world in business, a person might say, you know what, I like this deal so much that even though I've been shorted a sixth, I still want to go along with the deal. You're allowed to do that. In other words, you're free to make a decision. So I don't want to preempt and say the deal has to be destroyed if the money isn't exchanged. More than likely, he's going to say, you really owe me this money. I don't want to hurt the deal. Give me the money, and I won't void the deal. The other guy can say, no, I don't want to. I want to void the deal. In other words, all bets are off. You can do whatever you want. But as a practical matter in real life, if one guy says, I'm absolutely not giving you the money back, and the other guy says, well, then I can void the deal, but do I want to void this deal? Maybe this deal is good enough for me that even though I've been shorted by a sixth, I still want to make the deal. He has the right to say that. He has a right to say, I don't want to void it, even though you don't want to give me the money back. That becomes...
But that's only the aggrieved party. The one who is, quote unquote, not aggrieved does not have that right.
No, in the case of more than a sixth, either. That's the chiddush. That in the case of where it's more than a sixth, even the non-aggrieved party can say, I I think I want to walk away from this deal.
But is that more than a sixth of both value and price, or
Yes.
only of value?
Yes, yes. It has to be both according to Rav and according to Shmuel. In every case, undisputed more than a sixth. Yeah,
So
Menashe.
it opens it up again. That's the whole
It
point.
opens it up again to a brand new deal, correct?
And you can negotiate or renegotiate.
Exactly.
Walk away, whatever.
Exactly.
All right, so I'd say two things. One is that I could see actually a situation. Let's say I'm selling this stuff, and I'm thinking, you know what? Maybe I'm thinking if I hold on to this a little longer, then the regular price is gonna go up. I'll make more money, whatever. So today I don't want to sell it for $1 or for $1.15. I want to sell it for $1.50, which is way more than a sixth, but I have my reasons. And so somebody comes to me, they make a deal, and then they change their mind, or they start talking, we should work it down and do it just to keep it under a sixth. Even though the other guy, I might say, you know what, I'd rather just cancel the whole deal. So I might have my reasons. I can understand that.
Right.
What I don't understand is how there's a difference between exactly a sixth, however that's defined, but exactly a sixth and being over a sixth. How often would it really happen that it would be exactly a sixth? You're dealing with, all kinds of different stuff, $100, $1,000, $1 up, down, whatever. Is it ever really going to come out to exactly?
Now you're asking Jay's question. Now you're saying that valuation is not an exact science.
Well, no, I'm saying even if valuation is an exact science, okay, how often am I going to turn around and say, okay, everything on this table, we're going to take the official standard value and we're going to add exactly 1/6. You're not going to do that. You're going to try to sell for whatever you can get. And once in a while, maybe it might come out to exactly the sixth. Most of the time, it's going to be either significantly less or significantly more than a sixth.
Right.
It's not going to be exact.
So I look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the Chazal, the Amoraim, the Tanoim were business experts, and they sat at a round table like the CEOs in an economic forum, and they said, what is it that will trigger someone's anger, or it will pique him enough to say, I've been cheated, I don't want to deal.
Right. No. So here's the thing. I have no problem with them arbitrarily saying 1/6 is the magic number.
Right.
No
right.
problem. No
Right.
problem. It seems actually quite reasonable. What I'm saying is there should be a rule that would say the rule should either be up to and including 1/6 is A and more than 1/6 is B, or up to but not including exactly a sixth is A, and exactly a sixth and above is B. But what we really got here, it sounds like, is three different things. A is anything up to but not including a sixth. B is exactly a sixth, and then C is anything above a sixth.
Right, and that this discussion that you're now positing is really what this next Gemara is going to be really getting into in a very complicated way. So you're right. In other words, they could have broken it into two. They broke it into three because they basically said human nature. Let's call it human nature. If something less than a 6, it's insignificant. It's if you go to a store and you go to Giant, and Giant charges you $19.74 for your shopping list, and you pay them in cash. So look, they're obligated to give you that penny change, but that penny, which is what we're talking about, let's say the penny, right, the 6, the penny, who's really going to care if I owed you the penny? And many times they round it up and they'll give me the extra penny. They'll short themselves because they're not going to give you 4 pennies. They'll give you the next.
I have that at Costco. Everything ends in 99 cents.
Exactly right.
And if I return something that's not actually happened, I return something that's $9.99. They're like, you have a penny? I'm like, no, I don't have any change on me. They just give me the $10 bill, and they don't care.
Okay, right, and that's what we. So that is the lower side of this equation, is that if it's slightly less than a 6th, it becomes the penny, and nobody cares. So for the penny, I'm Michael, and the language of the Gemara is mechila. It's mechila. We're Michael that penny.
So why shouldn't the businessman always charge up to the 6th?
He will. You know, the
Yeah.
sale
He has
of a
no
merchant
incentive.
will
Mar
do
it
that.
becomes market forces. If
Right.
he's the only guy selling
Exactly.
eggs that day,
Right.
he'll probably mark it up just under a
He
six.
No,
knows
I'm
what the
saying a
market
regular-
is.
Somebody next to him, they're both going to charge it
But
close to the standard price.
a businessman selling something has to know that, look, I can always go up to 1/6. So why am I being a nice guy and charging just a regular?
Exactly, that's
neutral
what's
price?
gonna happen, and it'll be less than a 6 because he doesn't want to exchange anything. It'll be
That's right.
So
slightly less than that.
he's going
So,
up,
you know,
but
Right.
he has,
So
he
so
has
you're
a
asking
tolerance to go
why
up
the
to a
yeah
6.
why the Amoraim, why the Chazal in their wisdom said made that third category less than a sixth, an exact sixth. And by the way, that's really the whole focal point, is that exact sixth or slightly more than a sixth. Those are the three categories, and you could see that little fraction between less than a sixth and a sixth is the difference between mechila, or giving all the money back, or voiding the deal according to the Mishnah, right? I mean, we see that. So again, they had to draw the line somewhere, and the line had to be somewhat clear, not a crooked line. So the straight line was a sixth, little bit less, a little bit more. Okay, so that is the principle. Just give me 1 second here. I'll be right back.
Where are we up
I'm
to?
just concerned why the Amoraim didn't try and drive it down and saying anything above the regular price, there's some penalty involved, because you know what you're doing as this businessman,
Right.
and you're taking advantage because there's a window up to 1/6 or one.
Right, but that's
whatever
where
you set it,
competition comes
say,
in.
well, that's due to me because I can get away
If
with it.
you're at a farmer's
Yeah, but a
market and you
good
got 10
business-
people selling apples, that price is going to naturally drop down close to the standard price. You're the only guy selling apples, yeah, you're going to take advantage of it. That's
Yeah, but a good
apples.
businessman will take it to the fifth, 1/5,
Right.
and work on volume as opposed to on one person paying close to the sixth.
Right.
I can
No,
get
they're
three
going to.
people to get it at a fifth.
So we're up to, I believe we're right at the top of Nun Amud Aleph, because we
So
started
why
on Mem
aren't the
Tes.
Chachamim should be protecting?
Thank you.
They should be protecting the buyer more than the seller.
you can't be that specific. You have to allow some wiggle room because merchandising is not that precise.
Right, and the seller is in turn, unless he's the farmer, the seller is also a buyer. So everything goes both ways.
Okay, yeah. All right, so again, we're dealing with razor thin margin here, and yet the Chazal, certainly the Maram, understood, maybe because of experience and having started. Remember, the Gemara isn't written in a vacuum. When they talk about valuations, it's because they understood the marketplace. There was enough information for them to come back and to say, this is the marketplace. 1/6 is the sensitive dividing line between what someone is willing to accept and walk away from or not. I mean, again, maybe that's not the case in our economy today, but certainly in the economy that the Gemara is talking about, 1/6 became the benchmark for whether a deal was onerous, whether it was egregious, it shouldn't have happened, or whether or not people are willing to Michael. Again, in our time today, I don't even know if is it a penny? Maybe if it's even a nickel. A person's vata, you shortchange me by a nickel, I don't care. I mean, you get your change from the store, you count it, you look at it. Oh, he shorted me a nickel. Am I going to go back to the cashier and say you shorted me a nickel? I mean, a lot of people would, but again, that becomes something that the marketplace sorts that out. So in our case, 1/6 became that razor's edge.
Remember earlier in the Gemara, we had a posek who said he would expand it to a third, but was only good for that day, and then the merchant.
Right. So now wait a minute. That's going to be the subject of a huge discussion now in the Gemara. You're referring to what the Gemara talks about. The Tagrei Lud. Okay,
Right.
the Tagrei Lud. They were very, very happy when Reb Tarfon changed the equation from 1/6 to 1/3, right? And that is going to become a very important talking point in our Gemara as we go forward, because the Gemara is going to evaluate and say, well, is it a third or is it a sixth? In Rab Tarfon's world, it was a third. And in Lud, which we know where that is, the Tagle Lud, they were very happy that the merchants were able to walk away with deals that were less than a third as opposed to less than a sixth. So that changes the equation. We'll get to that. That part, Michael
Michael remembers that question from the first time we learned this Gemara.
Right.
Rabbi, how many years ago was that?
Yeah.
20 years ago or something?
Is that how much? Okay. Okay. So now let's go the third line from the top, Iboilahu. So the Gemara, so now we've already established, based on what we said, that we're following Shmuel, which means that shtus is not only value but also money. Okay. So now let's go weiter. Frek the Gemara Kasha, Pachas mishtus l'Rabbanan. Right? The Mishnah talks about shtus according to the Rabbanan, and it says pachas mishtus. What do we say? There's mechila. Interesting question, right? Pachas mishtus Rabbanan la'alta hava mechila or bichtei shiur l'tagel l'krovo. When the Mishnah says that less than a sixth there's mechila, is it right away? Or is it only after you go to your friend or to the appraiser and he comes back and says, no, it's less than a sixth, then it becomes mechila? What's the chilek? The chilek is that can you immediately after the event, if it's less than a sixth, if it's known to be less than a sixth, are you allowed to collect? Or are you forever barred from collecting? So in other words, something is worth 6 zuz, something is worth 6 zuz and sold for 5. So there's a 1/6 discrepancy. Normally you would say, right, that since it was downsold, the seller should be able to collect the 6th. If you say mechilas la'alter, he's lost. He can't collect it. Not allowed to. But if you say, wait a minute, you go to the appraiser or to your friend, then there's still a window for him to come back and say, I want that zuz. Otherwise, why bother going to your friend? In other words, by going to your friend, you're by definition saying that there is a pause before the final curtain falls. So that's the Gemara's kasha. It's a very logical kasha. Is it mechila la'alta or b'chtei shiur l'tagel l'krovo? So right, so that's the question. Take a look at Rashi. On the first on the altar. Have a mechila, afilu yachzer la'alter. In other words, right away from the very beginning, there is the whole deal. The deal is obviated. You have no leg to stand on to say I was cheated by a zuz, because the definition of mechila is la'alter. It doesn't matter in the marketplace. Less than a sixth isn't even counted. That's how we look at it. Oh, or no. You have an opportunity that you can go to your friendly appraiser or to your friend or relative, whoever, and they can tell you, oh, you were shortchanged by Azuz. In which case, does that window of mechila allow you to get your money back? That's the question that the Gemara asks. Okay. Says the Gemara, the imtim saloma b'chtei shiur l'tagel l'krovo. And if you come back and say, no, it has to be right away, because if you're going to say it is, no, the time that it takes to go to the appraiser or to the relative, then my ikar ben shtus lepachas mishtus. What's the difference between shtus and pachas mishtus? Right? Very obvious question. If you have the opportunity to go to your friend or the appraiser, but that's what we said in shtus. In shtus, we said that if it's a sixth, then there's a window, say the rabbis, the Rabbanan, go to your friend, go to your appraiser, go to somebody and ask. That's the halacha in shtus. But if that's the halacha in shtus, then the halacha in less than shtus has to be different. It can't be the same. Otherwise, why is the Mishnah saying that's the halacha in shtus? It should say, the Mishnah should say, that's the halacha for shtus or less than shtus or whatever. But by pinpointing that that's the halacha in shtus, it means that less than shtus has to be different. How is it different? It's mechila gemura. It's mechila from the get-go. You don't have the opportunity of going to your appraiser or to your friend or to your neighbor, right? That has to be the definition. That's one way of looking at it. In other words, by definition, it has to be mechila right away, right? Says the Gemara, wait a minute, I don't buy that. You know what? Ika, there is a difference. The ilushtus, here, listen to this. Now it becomes clear. The ilushtus, if it's an actual shtus, yodo al yona, then we fall back on the principle of yodo al yona. And the person who was defrauded, Rasa Chayzer, he can withdraw from the deal, Rasa Koino Machzer Oino, or he can get his money back. Whereas the ilu pachas mishtus, but according to this view, if it's less than a shtus, Kana umachzer Oino, you can't cancel the deal. The only thing you can do is get your money back. In other words, there's a valid distinction between shtus and less than a shtus, right? So you can't automatically say that it has to be a shtus. It could be even less than a shtus, and you still can get your money back because of the principle of yodo al yona. So that's the Gemara mai. What? In other words, we're left with a question. It isn't straightforward that it has to be one or the other, because you could justify saying that a 6 is irrelevant, or you can say it's not irrelevant. It's relevant, except that if it is less than a 6, you can only get your money back. If it's more than a 6, you can obviate the deal, because the Mishnah says you have the right to obviate the deal. Michael, you have a problem with that?
I have a major problem that you'll never have any business done, because somebody's always going to undermine and say, I can get more. How do you conduct business? And we learned before that a shtus is exactly a 6th. And if it's less than that, the deal goes forward. It's no harm, no foul.
Right. But what we keep having to remind ourselves is that there is a halacha, but there's also a practical approach to business. And if a person says, I was cheated by a 6th, I want my money back, then, okay, he's entitled to his money back, because a 6th, we say you've crossed the line.
Only if he can prove it.
Right, we have to prove it. But less than a 6th, we're saying, according to one Manda Amar, it would be totally irrelevant. You can't do a thing.
Right.
According to the other Manda Amar, I can still ask for my money back, but will I press the deal enough to obviate the deal because of that 1/6? That now becomes subjective to the people involved, and the Gemara is telling us that subjectivity is a valid consideration.
But that flies in the face of the concept of shtus. Shtus is 1/6. That was the benchmark. If it's we learned all along that if it's less than the
but Michael, what was it the benchmark for? It was the benchmark for allowing someone to say, I have been defrauded, I don't want to make the deal, or I want my money back.
And
Less than
no. If it
6,
was exactly
you
a
can still say,
shtus,
I want my money back, but I can't. Remember, we're talking about the Mishnah. The Mishnah gives you a choice in shtus to deep 6 the deal or to get your money back.
I
Not the
thought it was
halacha.
exactly a shtus, you could only get your money back.
No, according to the Mishnah, you have a choice of getting your money back or obviating the deal or destroying the deal. That's why this becomes complicated, because according to the Mishnah, if it's exactly a 6th, you have a choice. However, if it's less than a 6th, this Manda Omer says you get your money back, but you don't have a choice to obviate the deal. That's exactly the point. That's exactly the machlokes. The machlokes is whether less than a 6th is nothing, or you get your money back, but you can't destroy the deal. A 6th is you can destroy the deal or get your money back.
So
that's the chilek.
The consequences are different.
Yes.
Depending on what the value is up to a 6th.
Correct. Correct. So
That's the thing.
according to this one view, if it's less than a sixth, now either you say it's a mechila right away, or you say, no, you're limited only to getting your money back. However, if it's a sixth exactly, then we can distinguish it. Even if you can get your money back, we can distinguish it because by a sixth exactly, you can undo the deal. So the kasha was, if you can get your money back, what's the difference between shtus and less than shtus? The difference is that according to the Mishnah, in shtus, you can destroy the deal. Less than a sixth, you can't. You can only get your money back. That would be the fine line in the machlokes. Okay, do you understand, Michael? In other words,
I understand what you're saying, but I remember differently that we learned, and I can't remember the Mishnah itself, but I remember us saying that if it was greater than a 6, you had the right to.
no, but we're not talking greater. We're talking either exact
And
or
exactly,
less, not greater.
I thought there was at least one opinion that said exactly you have only a choice of getting back the difference. You don't have the choice.
According to Rav.
But Shmuel, I thought Shmuel agreed with Rav on that.
Right, but he says, but again, in the Mishnah, both Rav and Shmuel can undo the deal. In other words, Rav is the one who is only looking at value. Shmuel is looking at value and money.
I understand, but if we're just talking value,
but if you're talking the Mishnah, then even Rav says you can undo the deal. According to the Mishnah,
at exactly shtus.
At exactly shtus, you can undo the deal. That's right. Therefore, we have a chilik between shtus and less than shtus, because less than shtus, you still can get your money back, but no more. But if it's shtus, you can say, I'm peaked. I don't want this deal at all.
We'll never get a transaction done. That can't be done.
Well, again, now it becomes the business side of not the halachic side, the business side of the deal is someone has to say, do I want to undo it? But remember, who's the person that can undo it? Only the person who is Yado al Elyona. Only the person who has been aggrieved. The non-aggrieved party has no right to say, you know what, it's a shtus, I want out. He has no choice. Only the Yado al Elyona, the person who's been aggrieved, he's the one who can say, I want out.
That's me.
That's really the machlokes here. So we have an interesting situation. So, frankly, Gemara, what's the halacha? In other words, is less than a sixth a throwaway, or is there the opportunity of collecting that money? Because we're distinguishing between shtus and less than a shtus. Says the Gemara, I'm going to bring you a raya. What's the raya? Toshma, come and listen. Here's the raya. Okay, now here it starts getting a little, not a little, quite complicated, because we're entering into this whole area where it's called Tagre Lud, where we're going to have to bring up Tarfin, the author of the 1/3, right? The Rabbanan are the author of a shtus, and Rab Tarfin is the author of a third, which we said in the Mishnah. So we're going to scratch that surface now, but rest assured it becomes very complicated. Says the Gemara as follows: Toshma, come and listen. Chazru l'divrei chachamim. What does the Mishnah say? The Mishnah says, okay, Tagre Lud. Rav Tarfon says, no, it's not a sixth, it's a third. When the merchants of Lud heard that, they said, terrific. We're so happy with Rav Tarfon's psak, because now we have this whole span of 1/6 to 1/3 that we control, we the merchants control, and we can basically walk away with more money. That's why they rejoiced at Rav Tarfon's halacha. But Rav Tarfon had a addendum to that halacha, and he said, however, you have a whole day to recant, not just 20 minutes to go to your friend or to the appraiser or an hour, you have the whole day. So when the Tagre Lud heard you had a whole day, they said, wait a minute, the benefits that Rav Tarfon instilled in us, that we can now have up to 1/3, which we control, is negated by the fact that this fellow now has a whole day to completely wipe out the deal. When you're in business, you have to sort of evaluate. Okay, you're a businessman, and you give a refund policy, where are you better off? With a refund policy that gives you more time or less time? You want to give the limited amount of time. I remember, again, just generally speaking, department stores gave you 6 months to return something. Oh, I have 6 months to return it. Then they saw 6 months, oh my gosh, half the inventory came back. They said, we're going to give you 30 days to return it. Okay, so where is the merchant happier? The smaller the window to return, the happier they are. Even if the benefits of a third versus a sixth, psychologically, it's the return policy that the merchants are most concerned about. That's what this Gemara is telling us. The Tagrei Lud were extremely happy when Rav Tarfon said, "Oh, you have up to a third." Now they have an expansive amount of window to be able to say, "No, the deal is mine." But the minute that they heard that the refund policy was extended, then they say, what good does it do me? I can have a third, I can have a half, I can have any number. As long as they have a window to return, I have nothing. So that's why the Mishnah says that when they heard Reb Tarfon's total view, then they went back to the rabbis. So what does the Gemara say? Chazru l'divrei Chachamim, that as soon as they heard Reb Tarfon's caveat that you have up to a day, they returned to the rabbis and they said, Rabbanan, even though it's only a sixth, it's a very small window, right? It's a small differential, but we're going with your differential because the window is extremely small. So our profit will be a sixth or less than a sixth, not a third. We'll have less profit, but more likely to have a profit. And that's a business decision, right? You have a business decision. Do I want a bigger profit, but maybe the greater chance that I won't get it? Or do I want a smaller profit, but a greater likelihood that I get the profit?
But pragmatically, Rabbi, so I understand the day, but pragmatically, if somebody doesn't find out until the next day that it's a sixth, and can't they go back? I mean,
No. Not
so-
a lokeach. Remember, we said there's a difference between a mocher and a lokeach. We'll get to that part too. A mocher, a seller, has an open-ended time limit, and we don't understand that, but we'll understand it when we learn the next Gemara. It's the buyer. We're focused on the lokeach. The buyer only has that window. He wakes up the next morning and says, "Oh, wait a minute, I've been defrauded." Too late. It's too late. He has only the window of going to a friend. And while we don't have it, the Gemara hasn't defined it for us. We have yet to see what that is, but it's a very small window. They didn't tell us if it's a half an hour, but it's a very small window to go to a friend or to an appraiser, as opposed to I have a whole day. You know, it's not a day because you know a day is what Reb Tarfon said. So it's something less than a day. And I think we're going to find out that it's a very, very small window. But nevertheless, so once they heard Reb Tarfon's view, they were very happy. Savru, so says the Gemara, Savru, Pachas Mishlish Reb Tarfon, Kapachas Mishtus L'Rabbanan Dami. They equated less than a third to Reb Tarfon to less than a sixth, according to the rabbis. What does that mean? Just like less than a sixth to the rabbis is Mechila, whatever Mechila means, right? It's Mechila. So too, less than a third, according to Reb Tarfon, is Mechila. It is forgiveness. In other words, you don't have the same rights with less than a third as you have with a third or more than a third. So we're in our simple understanding of the Mishnah, we said there's a parallel between the rabbi's view of a sixth and Reb Tarfon's view of a third. Less than a sixth is Mechila, less than a third is Mechila, less than a third is Mechila.
Does
So
that
now,
mean you have no rights to any refund after that window?
that's what it would seem, according to Reb Tarfon, you would have no rights, correct. Says the Gemara, I Amrit Bishlomo, if you will say, Pachas Mishtus L'Rabbanan, that less than a sixth, according to the rabbis, is Bechdei Shiur L'Tagar or L'Chrovo, less than a sixth to the rabbi. you can still go. In other words, it isn't right away. It isn't la'alter. Remember the discussion of whether it's la'alter or not. No, it's not la'alter. You can still go to an appraiser if you say that, ula Rabbi Tarfon called hayom, and according to Rabbi Tarfon, you have an entire day, not just going to a friend. If you say then that's the case, mishum hachu chazru. That's why the merchants went back to the Rabbanan and abandoned Reb Tarfon, because basically you're saying that if you have mechila less than a third, a full day, oh my gosh, I'll never make any money, because a full day means that's a lifetime. So the fact that I'm upcharging them by a third has no value to me, because the refund policy is too generous. Says the Gemara, if you view mechila to mean appraisal, now we understand why the merchants went back to the rabbis, because where is there, they're saying in principle, where is there a greater likelihood of an event, when less than a sixth or less than a third? In other words, the smaller amount of fraud, let's say the smaller amount of fraud, the greater the likelihood that there will be only mechila and nothing will happen. A guy who, a third? Are you kidding me? For a third, I should be Michael? I'm not Michael. I have a whole day to evaluate. I'm going to come back and say, no way, this deal is off. So if you hold of the view that mechila means with evaluation, not right away, then it makes perfect sense why they went back and said, we're abandoning Reb Tarfon, we're going to the rabbis, because the rabbis gives us a better chance of recovering our item, because there's only a small window, a very small window, right? So that makes sense. So we say alta mechila. Ela I amrit. But if you say, the bottom line of the Gemara on Daf Nun Amud Aleph, but if you say, I'm sorry, but if you say Pachas Mishtus Rabbanan La Alta have a mechila, but if you say Pachas Mishtus according to the rabbis is right away, there's a mechila. If there's right away mechila, why did they abandon Reb Tarfon and go to the rabbis? There was no reason to go back to the rabbis and say, we're holding like the rabbis, because even according to Rabbi Tarfon, mechila is right away. There's no avenue for them to come back and say, we want to undo the deal. Mechila, it's over. The Tagrei Lud would, of course, want to live by Rav Tarfon's rule of a third, because they have a much greater chance of making that stick, since mechila is right away. So you understand the Gemara's kasha. You're asking me which mechila is correct, right away or Tagrei D'Rabbanan? Of course it's got to be Tagrei D'Rabbanan. Otherwise, why would they abandon Rav Tarfon and go back to the Rabbanan? In that case, the Rabbanan have no chance, and there shouldn't be even a Havamina in it. So that's what the Gemara wants to conclude. The Gemara wants to conclude that it has to be mechila b'tagrei with evaluation. Otherwise, the Gemara makes no sense why they would abandon Rav Tarfon and go to the rabbis. Okay, so we'll pause here, and we'll repeat this next week. But this now opens up the whole discussion, which I think, Michael, you mentioned at the very outset about Reb Tarfon. We're only talking about the rabbis. Now we're going to introduce Reb Tarfon into this whole parsha of shtus, right? Shtus was always a sixth in everything in the last few weeks. It's a shtus is a sixth. Now shtus according to Reb Tarfon is a third. That's a whole new avenue of discussion. If shtus is a third as opposed to a sixth, right? That's really the whole discussion. So let's take a quick look at Rashi. The top there of Nun Amud Aleph, v'imtim saloma b'chtei sheyira l'tageh or l'krova ma'ika. He's saying v'im bos loma devadai pshita de la'alta have a mechila. You're going to say, of course, it has to be la'alta. Di'i b'chtei sheyira Ma'ike ben shtus, and like, because that was the Gemara's kasha. If you're going to say it's not la'alter, what's the difference between shtus and less than a shtus? In both cases, you have a chance of recanting, right? So then the Gemara answered the Ika, the Elu shtus katani misnis misha hutla lav yado ala liona rotza chozeba. No, we said there's a chilek. If you are, if it is an actual shtus, you have the right to recant. Who? The person who's yado ala liona, only the one person. But if you're less than shtus, there is no chance of recanting. You only can get your money. You only can get your money. So that's a major difference between less than a shtus. Even if you hold that you're allowed to have, the mechila means you're allowed to have time, but the time doesn't invalidate the deal. The time only gives you a monetary consideration. Whereas according to our Mishnah, actual shtus, you can undo the deal. This is why the machlokes between the halakha and the Mishnah is so important, because if the Mishnah would be like the halacha, then shtus also has no chance of undoing the deal. Then you have a real quagmire. What's the difference between shtus and less than a shtus, according to the Mishnah, if in both cases the most you can do is get your money back? If you can't undo the deal, then you have a real question: what's the difference between shtus and less than shtus, right? That much we understand. Therefore, this Mishnah is saying no. When it's an exact shtus, you have a choice of getting your money back or undoing the deal. Now there's a difference between shtus and less than a shtus, because in less than a shtus, you can't undo the deal. You can only get your money back. Again, it's a little complicated, but I think we're getting the picture. Says Rashi v'lepachas b'shtus im chaza betoch kedei sheyira l'tago l'krovo kana umachsala ona. Then he can only get his ona, the fraud back, the amount of the money. Okay, all right. So let's just stop here. And so we've encapsulated our discussion, and we've said that l'chayra, according to this Tashma, according to what we just learned, it has to be that less than shtus means you can go to a friend or get an appraisal, because if not, then the Tagre Lud would never have abandoned Reb Tarfon to go back to the rabbis, because they would have said, of course we want to stick with Reb Tarfon. He gives us the best chance of collecting more money. But if the whole theory is make sure you get something as opposed to nothing, because if you have a window of a day to recant, you get nothing, then it makes sense that the Tagre Lud jumped on the rabbi's bandwagon and said, sure, we'll give you a chance, but your chance is going to be this big. Only the amount of time it takes to go to get an appraisal, which arguably is very small. So that's why we understand that the result is that mechila of less than a sixth has to mean the opportunity to get an evaluation. Okay, so again, it's becoming more complicated, and this sugya is known in Shas to be one of the more complicated, back and forth. You talk about our discussion, Jay, about valuation, money, why valuation isn't exact, money is exact. You ain't see nothing. I mean, this whole Gemara is talking about the minutia of how we evaluate something, and forget about money versus value. Even in money, there are complications, not just in value, but even in money, there are complications that make it very interesting. All right, so Mitzvah, we'll just review this quickly and then go into the heart of the whole discussion of Tagre Lud, of what it means to the chiluk between Rav Tarfon and the Chachamim.
Yashar Koach.
All right, Yashar Koach, everybody, a good week, and Taka.